recording? Yes, we're recording. All right, so we continue our conversation of the World War II, but we're talking again, focus on World War II in Asia, not World War II in Europe. We addressed that yesterday, and you can watch the video from yesterday to show that. All right, I went ahead and I labeled a lot of this stuff for you already, so you get an idea of what we're talking about. Here's Hawaii, and if you go further, is California, the east coast of the United States. Alaska would be up here, and then we have the Japanese islands, Korea, China. Down here is Vietnam. We get into the plane crash that just happened. They're searching for the plane right here, that's where they're searching. Further down is Australia, would be down here. The Philippines, and then the island of Midway. And I've labeled the big things that you need to know for the war. So we'll talk about those. And let's start with Japan. The Japanese islands, and there's more, it's a series of islands, 4 major islands and then a whole bunch of little islands. They have a finite amount of raw materials because they're an island. There's only so much space to grow things and do things in. When they wanted more, needed more raw materials, they had to go and get those raw materials. And if you look at the history of Japan, they've invaded Korea multiple times. And then they go into Manchuria and then into China multiple times throughout history. No different than here. If you remember that when we talked about the Chinese government, the first thing they did was the Japanese government, first thing they did was they went into an area of land north of China where they created a brand new Japanese-controlled kingdom. Like yesterday, I talked about the Germans coming into France, and they created, I didn't tell you the name yesterday, of a new French government called Vichy, which is the German-controlled French government. They did the same thing here in China, where they had a Japanese-controlled Chinese government. The last emperor of China was here, but it wasn't, to say they were Chinese government is a misnomer. It was really controlled by Japan. Eventually, they went into the coastal regions of all of Asia. All of this was under the control of China because that's where the raw materials were. When some of your presentations you talked about Nanking and the rape of Nanking, that takes place when they do this, when they take all these lands. As this is happening, the President of the United States, FDR, is trying to communicate with the Japanese government saying, you can't do this. You need to stop this investigation. You need to stop this imperialism attack into this a sovereign nation. You can't do these things. It's wrong to do these things. And the Japanese government, okay, glad you feel that way. Right? And it didn't stop their actions. And then at some point they went, okay, we can't grow this way, we got to grow that way. And what's the first major country when you go that way is the United States. Now there was some debate in Japan whether or not they should attack the United States. There were leaders in Japan that said, look, the United States is a sleeping giant. Just let it sleep. If you wake up a giant, it's going to be big and it's going to be angry. So let's just let it sleep. And other people went, no, let's punch that giant so hard in the face that when it fights, it will only worry about Europe, it won't worry about us here. That we will hurt it so bad. He said, okay, what's the one way that we can have a devastating blow to the United States? And that is to attack the naval base that is the home of the entire Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy, and that's in Hawaii. That's Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. All right, so they said, how can we create an attack that we can get ships, aircraft carriers, from Japan to Hawaii without anybody knowing we're coming? We got to figure out a way to get from point A to point B without anyone knowing we're coming. So the first thing they do is they have Japanese citizens go to Hawaii, and they rent airplanes, and they fly over Pearl Harbor, and they take tons of pictures. Take pictures of the islands. Take pictures of all the different airfields. They send all those pictures to Japan. So Japan has a layout of where the boats are docked, what each aircraft carrier looks like, where how the planes are lined up on runways, everything. Now the United States is cautious of Japan, but they don't think Japan's going to do it. But just in case, what we'll do is on our airfields here in Hawaii, we'll line up all our planes really close to each other so we can have guards protect them. That makes sense, right? To have like a couple guards protect the groups of planes. Okay, that's good. And we'll watch the radar, because radar is a new kind of invention. We'll watch the radar to see if any planes are coming, if there's any attack that's coming over. Okay, so we got that. Well, you know, what else can we do? Japan in D.C. is talking with the President of the United States about dealing with all this stuff, about having some sort of peace treaty between the United States and Japan. They're not going to attack us, we thought. The real is, really what happened is ships took off from different places in Japan, and they all met at one of the Japanese islands way up to the north. So they all come up to the north. And they all leave at different times. They also, if someone was in Japan watching it, it wouldn't look like anything particular. Now they met way up here because the shipping lanes where typical ships go are not in the north. The seas are very rough. And so no one will see them. So they sail over north of Hawaii and they come straight down at Hawaii like that. Instead of normally just coming straight over or following typically shipping lanes, they go north and come down. It's a sneaky way to come down. So it's Sunday morning, December 7th. What do you guys do on a Sunday morning? Sleep. What else? Church. Go to church.
Last minute home.
Last minute home.
What Sunday
That we'll say all day Sunday, but yeah, Sunday night or Monday morning, realistically.
Yeah.
People are doing all those same things then, right? They're doing the exact same things then, and there's a radar person who sees on a radar a whole bunch of planes coming from the north into Hawaii. So he calls his boss and says, "Hey, there's a whole bunch of things coming down." And they went, "Don't worry about that. That's planes coming from from mainland the United States that are coming over right now, and that's who they are. They don't radio anyone. They just see it on the radar and say, 'Don't worry about it.'" But it wasn't those planes. It was the Japanese. The Japanese come to Pearl Harbor and the different airfields on all the different islands. It wasn't just Pearl Harbor, but it was all the particular islands. The Japanese also sent subs in. The Pearl Harbor, the harbor inn is kind of like this, right? Actually, it's a little bit further. And the ships line up like this. Okay? And the thought process was they sent little midget subs in. A midget sub, like, okay, so a sub that normally holds like 40 people, a midget sub holds 3 people. All right? And it basically is a sub with a torpedo, that's it. And they sent like 5 of them in right here into the harbor. Okay, do you remember from Nemo? Okay, so go with yourself here. Nemo, right? They're swimming, and they go by those, like a chain with a ball. It was a mine, and the mines explode, and the subs, okay. So there's stuff like that in the front of the harbor. But the little midget subs can get through because they're smaller. They can get through things a little bit easier. As they're sneaking in, there's one American ship that's out here and sees a periscope and goes, "Captain, we saw a periscope." They start firing on it, and then it just disappeared. They're like, "What was that?" We don't know what that was. As that's happening, planes are coming in from the north. The thought process was the midget subs wanted to sink ships here in the middle, so none of these ships could get out, and the planes could just fly over and bomb the bejesus out of them all day long. That was the thought process. Okay. The planes come in. They are devastating to what they do to Pearl Harbor. The amount of people that are killed, more than like 2,000. I can get you the exact number, but thousands of people are killed. Ships are sunk. The USS Arizona is the ship has become the icon. It is sunk. It is still there today. There's a memorial over it today that you can go to Pearl Harbor and literally look through glass and see. There's the USS Arizona that's down there. There's bodies that are still in the ship 70 years later because they just couldn't get them out. It was just devastating. I'll show you some pictures here in a second, as well as I'll post stuff on Edmodo for you about it. It was devastating. And at several airfields. And you remember I said how all the planes were lined up? Well, that made it really easy for the Japanese planes to just come in and bomb all the planes at once because they're all right next to each other. So pop, 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 pop. All right, we killed all those planes. Let's go to the next airfield. Pop, 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 pop. And it was absolutely devastating. We did shoot down a couple of the Japanese planes. There actually is a story of a black Navy sailor who was on a ship when the attack happened, and he went up to one of the guns and started shooting. He didn't know what he was doing, but he wanted to help out, and he started shooting, and he shot down one of the Zeros. He's the first African American to receive like the Distinguished Navy Cross, whatever, some title, because he was a cook, and he stopped being a cook and they're trying to kill me, and I'm going to shoot back. There's stories of guys. Like when the ship sunk, there was oil in the water, so basically the water was on fire, and guys would come up out of the water, and they would come up out of water into fire. I mean, it's just absolutely horrible. What does fire need to burn? What's the one ingredient it needs to burn?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. So when you come up out of the water, there's still no oxygen to breathe because the fire is all soaking up the oxygen. I mean, it was just a horrible, horrible thing. That's December 7th. December 8th, FDR goes in front of Congress. Congress declares war, very famous speech. December 7th, the day which will live in infamy. It's famous forever. And we're at war. Okay? So we now know the Japanese are all doing all this. They have attacked us here. They probably could have attacked us more that same day, but for whatever reason they pulled their planes and they stopped attacking us. We don't really know to this day. Well, I'm sure some people do. I don't know why they didn't continue. They had a whole other set of planes ready to go on top of the aircraft carriers, and they didn't send them. And they really could have messed us up even that much more. Their whole goal was to sink our 4 battleships. The day they attacked, our battleships were out doing maneuvers. They weren't there. And because they weren't there, we're still in the war. That was their one goal, was to get those things, and they didn't get them. So they woke up the sleeping giant, and they didn't punch us in the face. They poked us in the eye. So it hurt. Give me a couple minutes. All right, now I'm ready to talk to you. Let's have a conversation. All right, the very first conversation we had was a raid called Doolittle's Raid. And that was where pilots were trained to fly planes, bombers, that weren't meant to be on aircraft carriers, but they learned how to fly them on aircraft carriers, to take off they got ships as close as they could to Japan, take off, fly, drop bombs on Tokyo, and then keep flying into China. Now, who controls this part of China? Japan. So land and hope you get caught by Chinese, not by Japanese soldiers. Because Chinese were allies to the United States. Japanese, not so much. All right? It's Doolittle's Raid. It was very successful about dropping bombs on Tokyo, freaked out citizens in Japan like the sleeping giant just poked our eye back. All right? And now we build up our military. We have the draft. We build up our military, both in Europe and in Asia. We build up, and it's time for us to start attacking. A lot of the first battles took place down here. Take a World War II history class if it really interests you to get into all the details. I told you about the movie Band of Brothers. There's a version of that called The Pacific, which is very similar to that. That will get into a lot of details about the way that it works down here. The Philippines, we had a very large American control in the Philippines. MacArthur was the leader there, but the Japanese came and took the Philippines. He left, and he said, he promised as he was leaving, he said, I shall return. Because he's like, I feel bad that the Philippines are being taken over by the Japanese. The Americans that were stuck there were put into the equivalent of concentration camps. They did a thing called the Bataan Death March that made people walk for 40 miles nonstop. And if you like bent over for any reason, they just cut your head off. That just like it was horrible, horrible. When we found the guys in the Philippines in these concentration camps, they looked like. Have you seen stuff about the Holocaust, about the way the Jews looked, how skinny they were? That's what our soldiers looked like as well. What the Germans were doing, the Japanese were doing as well. It was a horrible time for both countries of what was being done. The Japanese were very successful early in the war. We would argue that all of this was under Japanese control. The fear was that they were going to go into Australia and attack Australia. They controlled all of this, and they were winning the war in the Pacific. There's no question about that. Then we got a telecommunication, a telegraph that mentioned something, and an American said, "I think they're talking about Midway Island." Midway, and it's not midday; it's Midway. Midway Island gets its very original name because it's midway between America and Asia. Midway. Midway, we get this telegram that says that we think that they're going to attack Midway Island. There's an American Air Force base there. Okay, so we did a test run. We tested that said like a pump or something was broken on Midway because we wanted to see how the Japanese reacted. And they said the same thing we said in a telegraph that we knew that they could interpret. Then it was said, and we're like, okay, we know that they're going to attack Midway. So we put troops there, ships there ahead of time, waiting for them to come. So there are Japanese battleships coming in, American battleships, aircraft carriers, and there's planes flying around trying to find the other. Their planes are trying to find us, our planes are trying to find them. We got lucky, we found them before they found us. And over a 2-day period of fighting around the Midway Islands, not one of our aircraft carriers was sunk. 3 of theirs were. We won that day. They had more ships, they had more planes, they had more soldiers. We got lucky. We saw them first. And we had good fighting tactics, and we were able to win the Battle of Midway. This is the turning point of the war. So if Japan is winning the early stages of the war, the Battle of Midway was the turning point where now the U.S., we knocked out 3 of their aircraft carriers. They now can't take planes somewhere else. And so now the United States gets to push back. The Allies get to push back. And the Allies push back in through these islands, working their way towards Japan. Eventually we get to the Philippines, and MacArthur does return as he promised, and we rescue the people that are in concentration camps. We go to islands like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima that are they're the tops of volcanoes, is what they are. You know, the islands in the Pacific, you know, I don't know if you know this, but the Pacific is called the Pacific Rim, is all volcanoes. That's why we have tons of earthquakes in California and stuff like that. There's just a ton of volcanoes around. These little islands are all volcanic rock. The volcanic rock is just very easy to dig into. Not a lot of vegetation, a lot of caves. And by the time we go to attack, like, you know how we talked about D-Day and how horrible it was on D-Day? The soldiers in here, they did D-Day like 6 times. They went to one island, get that out, okay, now we need to go to the next island, and the next island. So they stormed into these beaches multiple times. It was absolutely horrible. And when we get there, the Japanese would rather die than surrender. The Germans were like that. The Germans would surrender. The Japanese would not. They'd rather die. They would fight to their death. And it was a very, very horrible, horrible way to fight. But we had a lot of people, and as we're a very big country, we have a lot of people, and as we're winning, you got to kill 3 of every R1. We kill 1 of you equals you killing 3 of us. We're going to win the war. And we slowly start punishing and taking island after island after island. We do this thing called island hopping, that we hop from island to island to island to work our way towards Japan. Okay? In that process, if any of you have been to Arlington National Cemetery, there's a very famous statue of guys putting an American flag into the ground. That's on the island of Iwo Jima. It was a Life. Do you know Life magazine? Yeah. Life magazine took a picture of these guys doing it, and they put it on the cover of the magazine. And that became this iconic picture of an American flag on top of this mountain on Iwo Jima, and it became just this iconic thing. It's like 5 guys. One of the guys died like that very next day. They tried to get the rest of them off the island and go home so they could go around and raise money, be like PR guys. You'd have to see what's the movie?
Letters from Iwo Jima.
Letters from Iwo Jima. That'll give you more detail about those particular guys. You can go to Wikipedia and read about that as well. So we slowly go island hopping, island hopping, island hopping, island hopping. FDR dies. The war in Europe is over. FDR dies. His vice president becomes president of the United States. So now we have to decide what we're going to do about Japan. We have invaded all these different islands, working our way towards Japan, and we see that the Japanese fight to the death. Do we really want to invade the island of Japan for these people that fight to the death? Is that really what we want to do? As we're doing all that, there's something going on in the United States called the Manhattan Project, where we're developing a new weapon, nuclear bomb. We split an atom. And the explosion from that is just ginormous. We developed 2 particular bombs. Was it Fat Man and Little Boy? One's long and skinny, like what you think a bomb would look like, and one's fat. They have different styles of how the bomb is activated. One has one way, one has the other. The long skinny one shoots like a bullet into an atom, and that explodes the atom. That, you don't have to arm it until you get on the plane right above the target. Then you arm it, then you drop it. Everything's good about that. The other one, you have to arm before you take off. And when it hits, that's when it explodes. It's a little scarier for that one. All right, so we decide we're going to use these atomic weapons. And a plane called the Enola Gay loads the skinny, long skinny one on the plane, and it flies to over Hiroshima. Right? The guy's targeting, look through a scope, targeting, goes, yep, that's Hiroshima. They drop the bomb. The plane turns around and and it's going back away. There's cameras to film the cloud, so you've probably seen the cloud on movies. The bomb hit, it's devastating, just absolutely devastating. Messes up Japan, I mean bad. And the United States government reaches out to the Japanese government and says, time to surrender. And they said, no, we're not going to surrender. That's August 6th. All right? 3 days later, send the other one up. Now the other one, you remember, you have to arm it before it takes off. So if the plane crashes, we have a big boom here, not there. But it didn't. It made it. Its first target that it went to was so cloudy that it couldn't drop a bomb on its first target. So everyone in that country lived because it was a rainy day that day. Crazy, right? It goes to the next city. And in that next city, Nagasaki, is where they dropped that bomb. Nagasaki is in a valley. So it's down here. So have you ever dropped a pebble in the water and it kind of ripples out like that? But if there's walls on either side, it can't ripple that way. It only goes up and down the, right? So when the bomb goes off, it goes up and down the valley, the explosion. It kills way more people in Nagasaki than it did in Hiroshima. Japan, you need to surrender. They win. Yeah, we're going to surrender this time. We're done. And then, so soon after that, we're there in the harbor in Tokyo. We're allowed to bring our ships in. There's a peace treaty that's signed where the Japanese signed a peace treaty and basically put the United States in charge of the entire country of Japan. The emperor, who everyone believes is the son of God, has to go on the radio and admit he is not the son of God. I'm just a human, no different than anyone else. And it's very weird. The Japanese culture, the minute the war was over and they lost, there was no fighting back. They went, okay, we lost. MacArthur, the same MacArthur at the Philippines, when his car, he doesn't even have to be in it, when his car would drive down the street, the Japanese citizens would bow to his car. Because that's the proper thing to do. It's a culture we don't understand. It's not our culture. Our culture is, well, we're going to keep fighting. And that's not the Japanese culture. You defeated us. It's really interesting. And if you look, all right, so that's the 1940s. When the war's over, both in Germany and Japan, the United States invests a ton of money in both of those countries to help rebuild those countries. Who are two of our strongest allies in the world today? Germany and Japan. We've built relationships over the last 60 years that they're some of our best friends, which is amazing. I mean, it's kind of like you have to beat up somebody to say, okay, now you're my best friend. Just don't think to challenge me, because if you challenge me, I'm going to win. But as long as you don't challenge me, we're best buds. And that's kind of scary, but that's realistically of what happened is we beat those two countries, then we helped rebuild them back up, and they went, okay, we're going to be allies with each other. Now we know when the development of that atomic bomb was taking place, there were spies in the Manhattan Project telling the Soviet Union how to build a nuclear bomb. And soon after, they had a nuclear bomb. The Nazis were also building a nuclear bomb, but the war came to a close before they could do anything with it. Like, if the Nazis and the Japanese had worked together a little bit better, and like not invaded Hawaii, and not invaded, tried to bomb England, who knows what would have happened around the world? Because the technology that those countries were developing were crazy good. The culture of warfare was crazy good. Who knows? But with many people that you know, when you win, a lot of times you think you're just going to always win. And when you just assume you're always going to win, one of the times you're going to lose. And in this case, the Japanese lost, as yesterday we talked about, the Germans lost. So all this land that the Japanese take, they had to give back. At the end of the war, we found out a lot about what was going on with the Japanese, like experimentation on people. The Germans experimented on Jews, but the Japanese experimented on the Chinese. One of the things that we do, and if I told you this, I apologize. They would have like a post, and they would take a Chinese citizen and chain him to the post, and then they would shoot him. And then the doctors would practice making him like come back to life, to save his life. Because that way they would know what to do on the Japanese citizens. You know what I mean? We practice on a Chinese guy. And then if he lived, you're like, okay, you lived, great, okay. Oh, it's snowy now? Okay, put him out there and leave him out there for 2 days straight in the snow. Okay, now can you save his life now? Okay, now put a bomb in front of him. Blow it up. Okay, now can you save his life now? And finally, eventually, oh, we didn't save him. All right, get the next guy. Isn't that crazy? That they just were tools. Well, medically, they learned so much about the human body. And when the war came to a close, and he wanted to try a lot of these people for war crimes, one of them made a deal with the U.S. government, said, okay, you can try me for war crime, and I will give you none of the information that I figured out by doing all this. But if you let me go free, I'll give you all the information. So what does the United States do? Punish the person that did this horrible thing and learn nothing, or learn everything and let this guy go. Knowledge is power. We let him go. And we took all the information, which saved countless American lives. So it's kind of sick and morbid, but it's like, how can we make something good out of something horrible? And that was the only thing that they could do. Now, I don't know if they went and sneakily took care of that guy another way later. I don't know about that. You know, like, no, you're free. Sure, don't worry about it. Yeah, he happened to get in a car accident. I don't know. So that's just a real brief. I mean, this tags along with your PowerPoints that you guys did. Any questions about what you saw up here? Okay, I want to show you a couple things on here just to give you more of an idea about Pearl Harbor particularly.